It is 4 a.m., December 18th, 1944. The Ardennes forest is silent, but this is not the silence of peace. It is the suffocating quiet of the hunt. For the 200 men of Baker Company, huddled in the frozen mud near the Belgian village of St. Vith, the world has shrunk to a few hundred yards of snow-covered pines. They are surrounded, cut off, and hopelessly outnumbered. The greatest German offensive of the war in the West, the Battle of the Bulge, has slammed shut behind them, and they are deep inside enemy territory. The air is so cold, it burns the lungs, a biting 15 degrees Celsius. Every snap of a frozen twig sounds like a rifle shot. Every man is a ghost, his breath pluming in the pre-dawn darkness. They are riflemen, machine gunners, and mortarmen, but they are also clerks, cooks, and drivers. Men who never expected to be on the front line of a desperate fight. Among them is Staff Sergeant Arthur Morgan, a mechanic from Ohio. Morgan is not a warrior, not in the way these infantrymen are. His hands, stained with grease that is now frozen into the cracks of his skin, are made for fixing engines, not firing M1 Garands. He is a man of logic, of systems, of cause and effect. And the situation he is in defies all logic. For 2 days, they have listened to the rumble of German armor, Panzers and King Tigers, grinding past their hiding place, sometimes so close they could smell the exhaust fumes. They are a pocket of resistance, an island in a sea of Wehrmacht grey. The radio is dead. Their ammunition is critically low. Their food is gone, save for a few frozen K-rations. The wounded, lying in a makeshift aid station under a collapsed barn roof, are dying quietly, their morphine syrettes long since emptied. The company commander, a young captain with eyes hollowed by exhaustion, has just given the grim assessment: they will not be relieved. Surrender is not an option. Their only path is to fight or to die. But Morgan isn't looking at the enemy. He is staring at a pile of seemingly useless junk. In the back of a disabled M3 half-track, hidden beneath a canvas top, is his folly, his useless invention, as the other men had called it just days before. It's a grotesque assembly of salvaged parts. A heavy-caliber machine gun mount, hydraulic pumps cannibalized from a wrecked bulldozer, and a series of steel plates welded together with a desperate agricultural ugliness. It was a project he'd tinkered with during the quiet days before the offensive, an idea to give light vehicles more firepower. The officers had dismissed it. It was unauthorized, too heavy, and lacking in tactical merit. Now it sits in the dark, a monument to wasted time. As the first grey light of dawn filters through the trees, the men check their weapons. They chamber their last few rounds. The distant, chilling sound of a German mortar sighting tube echoes across the valley. The attack is coming. The men brace for the end. But Arthur Morgan, the mechanic, looks at the frozen steel of his invention, and a different, impossible calculation begins to form in his mind. The breakthrough at the Ardennes was a masterpiece of strategic surprise. On December 16th, 1944, under the cover of a brutal winter storm, 3 German armies smashed into the weakly held American lines in Belgium and Luxembourg. The Allies, convinced the Wehrmacht was broken and incapable of a major offensive, had been caught utterly blind. They had placed green, untested divisions like the 106th Infantry, the Golden Lions, and exhausted units like the 28th, in what they considered a ghost front, a quiet sector to rest and refit. It was precisely this quiet sector that Hitler chose for his last, desperate gamble. Wacht am Rhein, the watch on the Rhine. The plan was to punch through the Ardennes, cross the Meuse River, and seize the vital Allied supply port of Antwerp. This, Hitler believed, would split the American and British armies and force a negotiated peace on the Western Front. The terrible weather was a key component, grounding the all-powerful Allied air forces, which had previously ruled the skies. Baker Company was a component of this shattered front. They were not an elite unit. They were just GIs, part of an infantry regiment that had been holding the line near St. Vith. This small Belgian town was a spider's web of critical roads. For the German panzers of the 6th SS Panzer Army, St. Vith was not the objective, but an obstacle. It had to be bypassed quickly to maintain the momentum of the Blitzkrieg. When the initial artillery barrage, one of the most intense of the war, lifted, German armor and Volksgrenadier infantry poured through the gaps, overwhelming American positions. Units disintegrated. Communications were cut. Command and control simply ceased to exist. Baker Company, executing a fighting withdrawal, had been pushed back. And then, in the chaos of a counterattack that failed, they found themselves on the wrong side of the German advance. The front line had moved past them, leaving them stranded, a tiny, forgotten pocket of resistance miles behind the new German front. This was the strategic nightmare. The tactical reality was even worse. The men of Baker Company were exhausted, frostbitten, and hunted. They were mechanics, radio operators, and infantrymen all mixed together. Staff Sergeant Arthur Morgan was part of the 106th Ordnance Detachment. His job was to keep the trucks, jeeps, and half-tracks running. He was a wizard with a wrench, a man who saw engines as living things. But he was also a warrior. Months earlier, during the steady advance through France, he'd watched light reconnaissance units get chewed to pieces by hidden German machine gun nests. Their M8 Greyhound armored cars and jeeps had only 50 caliber machine guns, good for suppression, but not for digging out an entrenched enemy. Morgan had an idea. What if he could mount something bigger on something small? In a salvage yard behind the lines, he found the components. The hydraulic traverse system from a wrecked M10 tank destroyer, the breech and barrel of a 37mm anti-tank gun deemed obsolete, and thick steel plates from a knocked-out half-track. Working in his spare time, he had welded and bolted this hybrid weapon onto the chassis of a standard M3 half-track. It was a monster. A Frankenstein's gun, his superiors called it. It was slow to aim, dangerously unstable, and utterly unauthorized. It was, in their words, useless junk taking up space. It was ordered to be dismantled, but the offensive struck before Morgan ever got the chance. The first shell lands at 6:51 a.m. It is not the distant thunder of the past 2 days, but the sharp, visceral crack of a direct-fire weapon, an 18mm or a high-velocity 75mm. The explosion rips through the trees just yards from the perimeter, showering the frozen foxholes with steel fragments and splintered wood. Then comes the sound, the one they all dread, the ripping canvas tear of an MG-42, the buzzsaw that cut American units to ribbons across France. The Germans are no longer bypassing them. They are cleaning up. Gray-uniformed Volksgrenadiers, veterans mixed with old men and boys, move with practiced efficiency through the snow. They are wraiths in the dim light, firing in short, disciplined bursts, advancing from cover to cover. Baker Company returns fire, but the sound is thin, desperate. The M1 Garands ping in the cold, the bars stutter, but the men are low on ammunition and terrified of giving away their exact positions. The company commander is yelling, trying to coordinate a crossfire, but the German machine gun has them pinned. It has the perfect angle, and the tracers are sweeping the line. Then the true threat reveals itself. It grinds out of the morning mist, its tracks churning the snow, engine rumbling. It is not a tiger, not a panther, but something more common, and just as deadly. A Sturmgeschütz, a Stug 3 assault gun. It is low, squat, and its sloped frontal armor is thick. It stops, its short-barreled cannon traversing. It is a bunker buster, an infantry killer. "Bazooka!" the captain screams. "Get that damn Stug!" A two-man team, shivering more from fear than cold, breaks cover. They scramble across the snow, the launcher on one man's shoulder. They are halfway to a flanking position when a German flare hisses into the air, bathing the woodland in a sickly magnesium light. The MG-42 finds them instantly. The red traces converge. The men don't cry out. They just collapse into the snow, dark stains spreading around them. The Stug, indifferent, fires again. The shell hits the corner of the barn where the wounded are sheltered. The impact is devastating. Wood, stone, and body parts are thrown into the air. The screams from within are horrifying. This is the failure. This is the tactical nightmare. The 50 caliber machine gun on the captain's jeep opens up, its heavy thump, thump, thump echoing across the forest. The big rounds slam into the Stuggy's armor, but they just spark, whining off into the trees. They are useless, like throwing pebbles at a fortress. The riflemen are pinned, the bazooka team is gone, and the wounded are being executed by high explosives. The GIs are trapped. They can't advance, they can't retreat, and their weapons are fundamentally inadequate for the threat they face. Staff Sergeant Arthur Morgan watches this from behind his dead half-track. He sees the 50 cal rounds bouncing. He sees the hopelessness in the captain's face. And he looks at his own creation. The 37mm anti-tank gun mounted in the back. It has the power. It has the armor-piercing rounds. It could kill that stoogee. But the half-track's engine is frozen solid. Its battery is a block of ice. The hydraulic system he so carefully assembled is stiff and unresponsive. The gun is pointing the wrong way, and he can't move it. His invention, his great idea, is nothing but 2,000 pounds of useless steel, a monument to his own arrogance. The Germans, sensing the kill, begin to advance again. The stoogee fires again. The high explosive shell screams overhead and detonates in the trees behind them, a terrifying crack that rains razor-sharp splinters onto the snow. The German infantry, emboldened, is moving up, using the assault gun as a mobile shield. They are less than 200 yards out. It is this moment, the absolute apex of the crisis, that clears Staff Sergeant Arthur Morgan's mind. The panic evaporates, replaced by the cold, hard logic of the workshop. He is not a soldier. He is a mechanic. This is not a battle. It's a systems failure. The problem is not the gun. The problem is power. The engine is dead, the hydraulics frozen. But the pumps he installed, the ones from the wrecked bulldozer, are just pumps. They only need to be turned. Anything that turns the drive gear will create pressure. His eyes scan the cluttered bed of the half-track. His tools. His junk. He sees a 5-foot steel pry bar, a heavy-duty lever. He sees the main drive gear on the hydraulic pump, the one he had designed to be run by the half-track's fan belt. The belt is gone, but the gear is exposed. He grabs the bar and jams it into the gear's teeth, bracing the shaft against the steel gun mount. He puts his entire body weight on it. The metal shrieks in the cold, but the gear doesn't budge. The hydraulic fluid in the lines is frozen solid, as thick as tar. "Fluid!" he yells, not to anyone in particular. "I need fluid!" He sees a can of ethylene glycol, engine antifreeze, in the back of a nearby Jeep. He scrambles for it, sliding on the icy ground. He snatches a hand axe from the half-track's pioneer kit. He swings it, not at the Germans, but at his own creation, shattering the frozen cap on the hydraulic reservoir he'd welded. The fluid inside is black sludge. He pours the entire gallon of antifreeze in, plunging his bare hands into the reservoir, ignoring the chemical sting as he mixes the toxic slurry. The glycol does its job, thinning the frozen oil, making it viable. "Help me!" He screams at the nearest GI, a young rifleman from Brooklyn. "On this bar, pull!" The rifleman, his face a mask of terror, drops his M1 and grabs the pry bar. The Stug, indifferent to their efforts, is turning, lining up a shot on the captain's command jeep. "Now!" Morgan roars. The two men throw their entire weight onto the bar. It bends, but the gear groans and turns. 1 inch, 2 inches. The entire 2,000-pound assembly, the gun, the mount, the steel plates, shudders and lurches. It's moving. It is agonizingly slow, a human-powered hydraulic system. "Again!" they heave, finding a rhythm. Pry, heave, reset. Pry, heave, reset. The gun is traversing, moving off the half-track's rear and swinging toward the German assault gun. The captain sees it. "Loader!" he screams, pointing at another GI. "Get that thing ammo!" The third man dives into the half-track, finds the wooden crate of 37mm shells, and rips it open. M51 armor-piercing, solid shot. He slams a round into the open breech. "Loaded!" he yells. The Stug is turning, its cannon now pointing directly at them. "He sees us!" the loader screams. "Again!" Morgan puts his back into the bar. The gun is almost there. The kid from Brooklyn, now the gunner, drops behind the salvaged sights, his hands spinning the manual elevation wheel. "On target!" The world compresses to a single point of light. The dark, circular maw of the Stugee's 75mm cannon. It is pointing directly at them. The German infantry, seeing the half-track come to life, has dropped to the snow, adding their Mauser and MG42 fire to the din. Bullets ping and shriek off the improvised steel plates, a deafening drumbeat of imminent death. The GI from Brooklyn, his eye pressed to the salvaged optic, screams, "I'm on him! I'm on!" The captain, seeing the Stugee's cannon depress slightly as it aims, roars one word, Fire! The gunner slams the firing pedal. The 37mm anti-tank gun, a weapon considered obsolete, barks. The crack is sharp, shockingly loud in the enclosed half-track bed. The recoil is violent, rocking the entire vehicle. The M51 armor-piercing round screams across the 150 yards of snow-covered no man's land. It strikes the Stuggy's frontal armor, the thickest part. The round hits with a flash of brilliant white-yellow sparks, and ricochets. It winds off into the forest, harmless. The assault gun is unscratched, its sloped armor doing exactly what it was designed to do. For a heart-stopping second, everyone freezes. The German infantry laughs. Then, the Stuggy returns fire. The muzzle flash is a blinding white sheet of flame. The shell's roar is not a crack, but a boom that splits the world. It detonates just feet from the half-track's front, a high-explosive round meant for infantry. The concussion is a physical blow, throwing the men in the back against the steel sides. Shrapnel, dirt, and ice blast over them. The GI who was helping Morgan on the pry bar collapses, a dark hole in his shoulder, screaming. The kid from Brooklyn is thrown from the gun sight, blood streaming from a gash over his eye. The half-track is blind, its crew broken. The invention has failed. The Stuggy, knowing it has a wounded target, begins to turn, grinding its tracks to bring its cannon to bear for a killing shot. The German infantry surges forward. This is the end. But Arthur Morgan is not a gunner. He's a mechanic. He knows armor. Sloped front, flat side. The track! He bellows, his voice raw. Aim for the track or the side. He grabs the wounded gunner, the kid from Brooklyn, and shoves him back onto the steel seat. Get on it, now! The loader, white-faced and shaking, has already slammed another round into the breech. Morgan throws himself back onto the pry bar, his muscles screaming. The Stuggy is turning, and in doing so, it exposes its flank. That flat 80mm side armor. Now! Morgan heaves, putting the sight just ahead of the turning tank. Fire! The kid, half blind, his face a mask of blood, hits the pedal. The 37mm cracks again. This time, the shot is perfect. It strikes the Stuggy's side, just above the road wheels, at a perfect 90-degree angle. There is no spark, no ricochet, just a dull metallic thunk as the solid steel shot punches through the armor. For a moment, nothing. The Stuggy continues to turn, then stops. A wisp of black smoke, thin as a pencil, snakes from the impact hole. A second later, the commander's hatch flies open, and a crewman, his black Panzer uniform smoking, tumbles out. Then the side hatch blows open. 2 more men scramble out, one of them on fire, screaming as he rolls in the snow. The Stuggy is dead. The German infantry, who had been advancing with absolute confidence behind their mobile fortress, are suddenly, horrifyingly exposed. They stop, their attack broken. Seeing his moment, the Baker Company captain roars above the gunfire. All weapons! On the infantry! Fire! The entire American line, which had been pinned and terrorized, erupts in a storm of lead. The remaining bars, the M1s and the captain's .50 cal, all open up on the now coverless Germans. The assault hasn't just been stopped, it's been broken. The immediate result was stunned silence, broken only by the screams of the burning German tankers in the snow, and the fading echo of Baker Company's triumphant volley. The Volksgrenadier assault, so disciplined just moments before, shattered like glass. Without their armored support, facing a weapon they could not identify, and a line that had suddenly, violently come back to life, their attack lost all cohesion. They were no longer hunters, they were prey. The survivors broke and ran, melting back into the grey woods, dragging their wounded with them. The MG-42 fell silent. The battle, which had lasted less than 20 minutes, was over. The men of Baker Company did not cheer. They were too cold, too tired, too numb. They just watched, their breath fogging in the frigid air, their trigger fingers slowly uncurling. The cost had been horrific. The barn where the wounded lay was a smoking ruin. The bazooka team was gone, 2 dark shapes in the snow. Inside the half-track, the victory felt just as brutal. The GI who had helped Morgan on the pry bar was bleeding out, his shoulder wound catastrophic. He would be dead in 10 minutes. The young gunner from Brooklyn sat slumped against the gun mount, rocking back and forth, The blood from his head wound, matting his hair, his eyes vacant with shock. Arthur Morgan, his hands raw and bleeding from manhandling the steel bar, simply stared at the dead stoogee. His useless invention had worked. The tactical victory was absolute. Baker Company had held. They had destroyed a German assault gun, a prize that entire platoons hunted for, and repelled an infantry attack that should have annihilated them. But the strategic situation remained unchanged. They were still 200 men, deep behind enemy lines, surrounded and freezing. They had just announced their exact position with the loudest noise possible. The Germans now knew precisely where they were, and they knew what they had. The victory bought them time, but it also painted a target on their backs. As the adrenaline faded, the captain took stock. They had expended a terrifying amount of their remaining ammunition in that final volley. They had more wounded than they had able-bodied men to carry them. But something fundamental had changed. Hope, which had been as frozen as the ground beneath them, had returned. They were no longer just waiting to die. They had a weapon. They had a chance. The captain looked at Staff Sergeant Morgan, then at the smoking stoogee, and then at the jury-rigged gun in the half-track. He didn't say a word. He just nodded. The mechanic, covered in grease, antifreeze, and blood, had just become the most important man in the company. The folly was now their fortress. Their survival, if it was to happen at all, now rested not on rifles, but on 2,000 pounds of scrap metal, and the mechanic who knew how to make it sing. The Germans did not attack again that day. The loss of an assault gun to an unknown weapon in a pocket they had considered neutralized gave them pause. Instead, they reverted to a more impersonal form of warfare. The mortars began, ranging shots at first, then a steady, harassing fire, turning the frozen woodland into a landscape of shell craters and splintered trees. The time bought by Morgan's gun was not a reprieve. It was a deadline. The company could not stay. To remain was to be systematically annihilated by artillery. The captain, Morgan, and the few remaining NCOs gathered in the lee of the dead half-track. The plan was simple because it had to be. They would use the night's cover and the gun to break out and fight their way south toward the rumored American lines at Bastogne. But the gun was on a dead chassis. The engine was cracked, the battery shattered. The Invention was now an immovable statue. Morgan, however, pointed to another vehicle, a standard M3 troop carrier that had been hauling ammunition before it threw a track. Its engine, he knew, was good. What followed was an act of desperate, frozen genius. For 6 hours, as mortar rounds fell, Morgan and a team of half-dead men worked by the light of a single shielded flashlight. They were mechanics, not ordnance armorers. They had no cranes, no heavy tools. They used pry bars, sledgehammers, and sheer freezing desperation. They cut the gun from its mount with a hacksaw. They jury-rigged a new base in the bed of the live half-track, welding it with a gas torch until the fuel ran out, then simply bolting it to the floor. Men's bare hands froze to the steel. 2 men were killed by a mortar round as they worked. But by 3 WWII, it was done. The Frankenstein gun was mobile. They moved out at 4:15 a.m., the half-track in the lead, the 78 men who could still walk following in its tracks. They hit the German roadblock on the forest road at 4:30. The sentries huddled around a fire didn't even have time to raise their rifles. The 37mm loaded with canister shot Morgan had found erased the roadblock in a single, deafening blast. For the next 2 days, Baker Company fought a running battle. They were a ghost unit, led by a ghost weapon. They ambushed a German supply truck, capturing food and fuel. They used the gun to destroy 2 more machine gun nests and a Pak 38 anti-tank gun that blocked a critical crossroads. Arthur Morgan lived in the back of that half-track, clearing jams, aiming the weapon, and keeping his creation alive with wire and prayers. On December 21st, near the village of Cibret, they saw it, the silhouette of an American M4 Sherman. It was a reconnaissance patrol from Patton's 3rd Army, racing north to relieve Bastogne. Of the 200 men who had been trapped, 78, many of them wounded, walked out of the forest. The kid from Brooklyn, his head bandaged, was one of them. Staff Sergeant Arthur Morgan was not given a medal for his invention. The unauthorized field modification was never officially recognized. When the war ended, the Army simply wanted its vehicles back, and the half-track was scrapped, its hybrid gun lost to history. Morgan went home to Ohio, opened a garage, and rarely spoke of what happened in the Ardennes. His legacy was not written in reports or etched onto a monument. It was written in the lives of 78 men. It was in the families they would go on to have, the children and grandchildren who exist only because, in the coldest, darkest hour of the war, one mechanic looked at a pile of junk and refused to see the impossible. If this story moved you, hit like and subscribe, because history like this deserves to be remembered.